good morning and good afternoon, Singapore and Australia, and hello to all of you who are joining us from around the world. Welcome to another panel discussion in a series of webinars presented by the School of Business here at James Cook University in Singapore. My name is Ed Ng. I'm a visiting professor of OB, Organizational Behavior, and I also organize the People's Cultures and Careers Research Cluster. I'm your host for today's highly anticipated editors panel on how to write a good review and more. Well, let me emphasize that this panel isn't just for reviewers only, but also authors who are responding to your revise and resubmits. So for today's event, I am pleased to introduce to you our panelists. And first off, in alphabetical order, Professor Tim Battram. Professor Battram is a professor of HRM and head of the HRM and IR department in the School of Management at RMIT University. He is the co-editor of Asia Pacific of Journal of Human Resources, along with Professor Fang Lee Cook. He is also on the editorial board of Personnel Review, whom I'm actually actively involved in. So welcome to Professor Battram. If you can turn your camera, there you go. All right.
Okay, voila.
All
Okay,
right.
hello everybody. My name's Tim,
Oh,
and
hang on, Tim. I'm going to introduce everybody first before.
everybody first. Okay,
Yeah.
great. No worries. Thank you.
Apologies. Next up, we have Professor Andrew Jackson, who is a professor in the School of Accounting, Auditing, and Taxation at UNSW. He is the editor-in-chief of the Australian Journal of Management, as well as president of the Accounting and Finance Association of Australia and New Zealand. Welcome, Professor Jackson. All right, and then next up, we have Professor Paulina Stetton, I guess we get into trouble together. Professor Stetton is an honorary professor and former dean of the School of Management and deputy vice chancellor at RMIT University as well. She is the co-editor-in-chief of Personnel Review. Welcome to Professor Stetton. A little fun fact about Professor Stetton and myself: she offered me a job once in Australia, and I did not take it. And last but not least, we have Professor Lucy Texa. Chief for the Journal of Industrial Relations with Amanda Punt. So a big warm welcome to Professor Texa as well. All right, please do turn all your cameras on. So a very warm welcome to all of you panelists, as well as attendees who are joining us from JCU in Singapore. Before we begin, here are a few housekeeping items. The webinar will be recorded for publicity purposes. You will be able to ask questions at any point of the webinar through the Q&A function. Q&A will also be done at the end of the presentation, so we won't have a very long presentation or a panel discussion. We want to really open this up for all the audience and attendees to be able to ask questions of the editors we have here with us. And this is a message from Nicole, who is our organizer. Thank you, Nicole. There will be a satisfaction poll and survey at the end of the webinar. Please take just 2 minutes to help us complete the survey. Your feedback is very important to help us improve and bring topics that are of interest to you. And of course, if you encounter any technical issues, just use the chat button and communicate with Nicole and some of our technical specialists, and they will be able to help you. So for today's panel, I will first offer each panelist 2 minutes to tell us exactly about what their journal is all about, after which I will have a series of questions, which I'll post to the different editors. We won't get each editor to answer the same questions. But of course, if any of you editors have something to add, please do raise your hand and I will call on you to respond as well or to add to the response. So first up, Professor Battram, please tell us about the Asia Pacific Journal of Human Resource Management.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ed. The APJHR has been established since 1962, so it's been around for a long time, and generally our focus is on human resource management and employment relations phenomena in the Asia Pacific region, just like the title says. We're generally focused on the role of human resource management in context. So we're very much interested in understanding HRM phenomena from a practical perspective and a practitioner perspective, and also from a theoretical perspective, specifically in the Asia Pacific region. So from that perspective, where we're quite a broad church in the sense of we do accept employment relations type studies, human resource management studies, leading to some various types of organizational behavior studies with a focus specifically on human resource management. So we tend to get the vast majority of manuscripts from from China, from Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. We really want to encourage more and more from countries such as the various other Vietnam, for instance, and Thailand, and various other Asia Pacific countries. So we're we're really interested in broadening the types of manuscripts we get, specifically looking at HRM in context in specific Southeast Asian countries. So we generally get around about 600 manuscripts per year. So we're quite popular in that sense. And we generally have a rejection rate of probably around 95%, I would think. So we have an editorial board, a star-studded, which some of you guys are on the editorial board and do reviewing for the journal. So we have some very, very interesting discussions and debates and examinations of theoretical HRM and empirical HRM issues and phenomena in the journal. That's it from me.
All right, thanks. Hey, Professor Jackson, welcome. Can you tell us a bit about the Australian Journal of Management?
Sure, thanks, Eddie. So the Australian Journal of Management was founded back in 1976, so not quite the oldest here, but significant history. It was set up at the Australian Graduate School of Management, and it is owned and run through UNSW Sydney at the business school. Consistent with the Graduate School of Management, we do publish papers across the broad ambit of business subjects. So accounting, finance, OB, HRM, strategy, international business, marketing, supply chains, and so on. So very broad-based. Essentially, what we are focused on is trying to very much encourage research which is able to engage with practice and industry. But on top of that, we're also interested in more of the theoretical elements as well. So very much open, and we are the Australian Journal of Management, but we're not just interested in Australian studies, interested in whatever research that is being done, which speaks to contributing to the broad management area. So I've got a team of, I think, 6 deputy editors. I think we've got over 20 associate editors, and we are receiving about 900 papers per year. Over my tenure, the journal has very much grown, and I've very much encouraged more of the management type papers. So as an accountant, I'm not necessarily across everything, but I've got a fantastic team who is able to assist. Thank you, Eddie.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Professor Stenton, could you tell us a little bit about personnel review? Oh, Pauline, you are muted.
You're on mute, Pauline.
Thank you, Ed. So Ed and I are the co-editors-in-chief of Personnel Review, and we have been since the past 4 years, I think, Ed. So Personnel Review is an international journal, originally based in the UK. It's an Emerald journal, over 50 years old. Since Ed and I have been co-editors-in-chief, we've really tried to broaden the base of Personnel Review. We've really tried to extend the range of people on the editorial board from different parts of the world. We've tried to have a much more international perspective rather than just, if you like, the UK and the US, which was traditionally probably where a lot of the Personnel Review papers were situated. Personnel Review is very, very strong in Australia, very strong in Canada, and in the US. We focus on HRM and also employment relations, and that's where our main discipline area is. Over the past few years, the number of submissions has grown tremendously. So from something like 800 in 2020 to over 1,100 submissions last year. And our acceptance rate is actually quite low. It's 6.5%. So it's quite difficult to get into personnel review, and we do require really good reviewers to help us to try to do that. Like all journals, we're constantly trying to improve our site scores and our impact. And so we want our papers to be read and cited by others. That's what's important to us. In terms of the kind of papers that we have, we're keen to have original and innovative papers in our journal. And we do look for different ways of doing things and attracting new ideas and trying to keep up with really what's taking place at the moment. We also, of course, want papers that are relevant to the discipline and are actually sort of aware of what the key debates are within our discipline at the moment. So I've got a few comments that I can talk about later, which is in terms of, some of the key limiters, things that actually stop papers from getting published and things that perhaps as a reviewer that you need to think about, which I can talk about later. But I think one of the things that we try to do at Personnel Review is we try to take a developmental approach to papers. If we see a paper that we think has got something in it, might not be there yet, but we do try to take that kind of approach. And I'll finish off by saying that reviewing is a really valuable experience for the reviewers as well, of course, for the authors, because you can learn a lot by reviewing papers.
Thank you, Pauline. That was you started answering my questions already. Okay, last but not least, Professor Taxa, tell us about the Journal of Industrial Relations.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure.
Oh, are you muted as well? We can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Oh, now we could, yes.
Yeah, it's Telstra. Those of you in Australia know what I'm talking about. The Journal of Industrial Relations, I think, is the oldest one represented here today. It was formally established by what was then the Industrial Relations Society of Australia in 1958, and the first issue was 59. So we just celebrated our 65th anniversary last year. And the organisation that owns us is the Australian Labour and Employment Relations Association, ALIRA, and it's made up of managers, trade unionists, government, public servants, professionals, consultants, and academia. So it provides a forum for research on a whole range of interdisciplinary and, broad areas of industrial relations that covers employment relations and work practices, pay and conditions, workplace health and safety, labour law, and broader social and economic issues, including job quality, the future of work, digitalisation, diversity, gender, age, disability, and so on. We've been co-editors. I've been co-editor with Amanda Pyman, as Eddie mentioned, since 2022. And like what Pauline was saying, we've really worked very hard to internationalise the journal, extending to areas and regions that haven't been covered in the Asia-Pacific area, in South America, and also in Africa. So we have a special issue in Train at the moment on sub-Saharan Africa and employment relations. Basically, we seek to publish high quality, of course, as the others have been saying. So we have a high rejection rate. The thing about the papers that we get is that they cover a wide range of areas because industrial relations is multidisciplinary. So it covers all the actors in industrial relations, the institutions, technology and technological change. And what that means is that a lot of people submit to our journal without actually dealing with the scope and aims of the journal. And this is, I'm sure my colleagues have this problem as well, and that can really have an impact on rejections. But the journal itself welcomes critical perspectives. That's a commitment we have. Multi-level analyses, conceptual challenges, and we challenge also methodological orthodoxies. But we stress consistently that contributions have to align with the aims and scope. We don't accept papers that centre on the development of validating research instruments and so on. We really do welcome things that are outside of the box, papers that are willing to challenge. Picking up on the point that Pauline was making about developmental approaches, we launched an early career researcher editorial traineeship scheme in 2022. It was a 2-year process to teach early career researchers about the actual editorial process. We've been rejigging it, and we're about to relaunch it as a early career researcher editorial mentoring scheme. So watch this space. It's coming to your platform soon. I'll leave it there.
All right, thank you, Lucy. I love that. So for those of you who are thinking about, joining an editorial board or signing up as a reviewer for the first time, later on, I'll pose this question to the editors for the different journals on how to do this. All right, first off, this is actually a question I want all of you to answer, despite me saying that I will make everybody answer the same questions. How do I write a good review? As an editor, what are some of the key elements you look for in a good review? So have a think, and then I'll call upon different folks to answer that question. Why don't we start with you, Andrew? What's a key element of a good review?
It's a hard question, Eddie. I could probably much easier answer what is a bad review.
Okay.
I think a good review is one which is constructive. Is constructive even if the recommendation is not positive. Is fair, is balanced, and is not obscure. So in terms of the point of the review is one to give a recommendation to the editorial team. So the reviewers don't make a decision, it's the editors who make the decision. So the reviewers need to be aware of that. But they also need to, and so that recommendation needs to be clear to the editor, what do they see? But it should also be constructive. So even if the paper doesn't go for revise and resubmit, it provides a clear indication to the authors, what are the major issues and how should they be solved? In terms of thinking about a bad review, some sort of ones that I've seen in the past, either to myself or others have shown me or through this role, is things like, oh, there's a correlated omitted variable. But if you don't tell me what is that correlated omitted variable, it's meaningless. And so very generic type of comments like that are not useful. I think in a very brief sense, that's what I would consider a good review to be. And I think we'll get into much more detail as we go through.
Great, thank you for that. All right, Lucy, what about you? What do you look for in a good review? Or what makes a review a poor one? Oh, I think you're again muted.
Can't hear you.
No sound.
All right, Lucy, it's not coming through yet. Why don't we go to Pauline, and I'll come back to you if that's okay. Pauline, what makes a review good or bad?
Well, Well, I mean, everything that Andrew has said, absolutely everything that Andrew said, the effort that's been taken by the reviewer in reading the paper, because sometimes I've seen reviews that look like the reviewer hasn't even read the paper or has just had a brief sort of look through it. So something that really demonstrates that the reviewer has read the paper. I've seen some positives in the paper as well as some negatives that can be fixed, and some suggestions that how to do that. And I think also, in terms of being specific, sometimes pointing to a particular paper, a recent journal article that's kind of in the field, is really valuable, you know. So if we're going to say, well, this is missing, then perhaps direct to a couple of key papers that could be helpful for the authors to go and visit and have a look at, rather than just generic comments about, you know, this hasn't been done and that hasn't been done.
Okay, that's good. Hey, Lucy, can you
Me
catch the
now?
mic? Yes,
Can you-
awesome.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so I was saying that I agree. It's very difficult to say across the board what makes a good review, but I think clarity and you know, a systematic approach so that you can provide guidance to the author. But one of the other things I think is important is that the reviewer actually not only picks up ambiguities and weaknesses, but addresses them constructively, seeing the, you know, possibility of giving additional advice. But one of the things that I'd like to say is that it's really important for reviewers not to be gatekeepers following fashions and trends. Often there are reviewers that are on their own bandwagon and nothing else comes into the picture. And so if somebody's trying to do something really innovative, they're shot down in flames. To me, this reminds me of, you know, the Galileo or Copernicus syndrome, where these great thinkers said, look, you know, the Earth is not the center of the universe. And of course, they were shouted down and taken to court by the church and so on and so forth. I think it's really important when we see something novel, and maybe it doesn't quite make it, but the effort's there, is to encourage people, help them refine their innovations, and to really assist in where, number one, they are trying to fill a gap, right? And they have to explain not only why they're filling the gap, why is it important to fill that gap, or on the other hand, to advance knowledge. That's what we're on about, right? So I think it's really important for the reviewers to be open-minded and to be reflexive about their own biases. Leave it at that.
Thank you, Lucy. That's really good. Tim, you get to also add to what makes a good review or a bad review.
Okay. Thanks, Ed. From my perspective, I think I agree with everything everybody said. I think everyone's had some wonderful points. And I think the idea of constructive feedback, but having that feedback specific, because quite often and we all know as authors, when you get a revise and resubmit and you're not quite sure what they mean, right? And you're not quite sure how to tackle the specific point, because there isn't any clear guidance for people. So I think having some specific clear guidance in terms of how to improve the paper, I think makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is I think it's important to have commentary on each section of the paper that's specific to each section, where you'll say, okay, abstract, you know, this bit's great, extend this bit, or the contribution is not clear, or the key message of the paper is not clear. So I think having very specific, breaking down the review in terms of the abstract, the intro, the literature review, and so on and so forth, and have very specific points where you're singling out page numbers, where you're singling out, that specificity, I think, is just so important, because it does enable the author to, because what we're trying to do as reviewers and editors is really help the person get the paper to a publishable standard that's going to make a, a novel and important contribution to our discipline, whatever that may be. I think the other important point, and I think this is something that is really vital and which has been touched on, is the role of the editor. I think the role of the editor around flagging, because quite often when you have a bunch of, a couple of reviews, there's one reviewer that's really positive and say, this is amazing, possibly because they haven't probably read the paper, or maybe it is amazing. But the other reviewer just hates everything, right? And quite often there's that reviewer. It's always reviewer number 2 for some reason. I don't know why, right? But nevertheless, I think having the editor, because the editor's the one that makes the decision at the end of the day. So I think having the editor call some shots and have some authority in terms of shaping the paper as well. I think that's really, really important role of the editor. That's all from me.
That's awesome. Thank you all. I'm just going to summarize this really quickly because I heard some really, really good points. So as a reviewer, these are some of the things I would think of. Number one, read the paper. Pauline said that, right? Oftentimes people just skim the paper the quality of the review is reflected in the fact that you haven't really have a good grasp of the paper, the clarity in terms of your review. What exactly do you want the authors to do to fix the paper? I think that's really important. Of course, I hear about, giving constructive feedback. Oftentimes, people often give negative feedback, but they're not really helpful. That leaves the author not knowing how to fix or address the issue that has been raised, right? That's important as well. The amount of effort. I like what you said, Tim, in terms of, oftentimes reviewers front end their reviews. They give you a really good review on the lit review, the problem, the methodology. And then as you go through, they don't really speak much of, the discussion, the implications, which are equally important. So that's a really good, and offering guidance. That's what I heard from Andrew. Now I have a question in terms of effort. Both, I think Pauline and Lucy touched on this. I'm going to get Pauline to answer this for us. So yay, I've got my first invitation to review a paper, and I've got some students here that join us today. I can see that. So this is really exciting, but it's not really in my wheelhouse. I'm flattered to be asked. I want to do the review. So how much extracurricular reading do I need to do in order to do a good review? So how much time should I invest?
Personally, I think if it's not in your area and you're not an experienced reviewer, then I would say, sorry, this is not for me. We're busy enough as academics doing so many different things, and we shouldn't have to go away doing heaps of research. I think if it is in your area, then you may need to go, as I said before, you might look at something and think, sure, someone's written something quite recently on that. So you might need to go back and check that out. I think that's the kind of research I think that you need to do. When you know that something's been written recently, you can't quite remember, can't remember the authors, or within the paper that the authors have said something and that's not quite right, and you just can't think, what is it? Somebody's written about that, but it yourself, you just go away and check. So to me, that's the kind of research. If you like researching context with a limited context, I don't think you should be taking on reviewing papers if you actually don't know anything about the subject, because I don't think that's fair to the authors. I think you need to be within that. You need to know what the subject matter's about.
Good advice. Protecting your time, that's important. You should do some research, but probably not invest a whole lot into it, especially that's not in your wheelhouse, right?
Yeah.
So Andrew, you have a journal that is quite multidisciplinary in the sense that it's all in business and management, but you go from accounting all the way to operations management and logistics. So methodology is important. So, do I have to be really good with the topic or methodology before I accept a review? Or if it's in my field, but, good enough, again, sort of building on Pauline's point earlier, how much of the familiarity or skill do I need to have to be close to the topic or methodology?
That's probably a question for my associate editors to ask rather than myself. But we also do have a policy at the AGM that every paper is going to be reviewed by at least one editorial board member. So we know that we're going to have at least one review, which is going to be very high quality, which does give rise then to allowing for a second reviewer to essentially come along. Maybe it's a little bit more developmental. Maybe it is someone who is more expert in an area. So there's a number of different areas. In terms of the getting an invite to review, it's probably also going to be the case that you're being asked to review for a particular reason. We don't just pull names out of the hat and say, oh, this person can do it. There's going to be some level of familiarity to say that, well, we want you to do this. I'm on the editorial board at Contemporary Accounting Review, which is one of the FT50 journals. I get a lot of papers to review which are analytic in nature. I can't model myself out of a paper bag, but I know that I'm being asked for a particular reason. So in my reviews, I don't comment on the math. I comment on the intuition and the other parts. And I understand that the editor knows this. And so my review is going to essentially focus on the part that I'm expert in and I can provide evidence on. So if you're not fully familiar with methodology, then maybe there's a reason that you are being asked to do it. If you're not sure, ask the editor. Am I the appropriate person? I don't have the expertise in this, but I could talk about this. Do you still want me to review the paper? Editor's either going to say yes, or they're going to say, well, thank you for letting me know, probably not appropriate. So really, if in doubt, ask. An editor isn't going to complain about being asked if you're appropriate or not. They're probably going to complain if they get back a substandard review.
Yeah, that's really good advice. There's clearly a reason why you have been selected to begin with, right? So,
Yeah.
but when you're not sure whether you're being asked to do the review as a subject matter expert versus a methodology expert, be upfront, disclose to the editor, I can only review the content, or I can only review the methods part. And that's often what I do when I need a second or third opinion, especially on the methodology. I would literally go to my friends and say, can you just look at the stats for me, right? I have no more friends as a result. All right. I know they start unfriending me on Facebook. So I have another questions that pertains to feedback. Oftentimes when we get reviews, they're all generally negative. Are reviewers encouraged to offer positive feedback, things that were done right, or should all reviews be sort of negative and a critique of the paper itself? Lucy, what do you think?
My hard and fast rule on this, both for myself and for others, is to start off with the positive. Somebody's gone to a lot of effort to do the research. And I think it's really important not to shoot anybody down without recognizing, and it goes back to Pauline's point about read the paper and see what is this, there must be some strengths. And I think it's really important, thinking of your audience, i.e. the author or authors, not to really hit somebody on the head. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and I just also add that it's important to be positive for the positive papers that you want to have accepted, as well as the ones that you think are subject to a major or minor review. I think going back, and this links up to the previous question, I think it's very important for a reviewer to be honest about their own strengths and weaknesses. Okay, I don't know about this, but I know about this, and this is a strength, but it's also a weakness. I think measured and dispassionate is very important. Look, I think it doesn't hurt to be kind, right?
I like. Thank you for that.
Generosity of spirit is, goes with the developmental point that Pauline was making earlier. I think that's very, very important. And whether it's, you know, accepted for a minor or major revision, as the other colleagues were saying, you have to be specific so that the authors can actually know what they're addressing, if it's minor, major, whatever. And I think it also is important to leave it open so that the author can say, look, good point, thank you, review.
Oh, good.
Oh, is it me or Lucy seems to be
Lucy seems to.
I think it's.
frozen? Yeah.
Ed, can I add something to that?
Yeah,
as well?
of course.
And
Yeah, well,
so I was just sort of thinking that I certainly with personnel review, and I'm not sure about the other journals, but with personnel review, when you get a
however, this
oh, sorry, Lucy.
is
So
beyond the scope of.
Lucy, you're coming in and out.
Lucy, you're now muted. Try try
Yeah,
to
Telstra keeps telling me I'm unstable, not me, my internet. Sorry, I missed that, Pauline. I don't know what you said.
Well, I was just
So
following
let
up
me
actually
finish,
something that,
we'll let you finish, Lucy, and then we'll get Pauline to chime in.
so I was just following up on something as you were talking. I was just thinking that certainly for personnel review, I'm not sure about the other journals, but for personnel review, if you've been invited to review something, the paper will have already gone through 2 screenings. So the first screening will be from the editorial assistant, who will have made sure that basically it's in scope in a very general sense, and also it's within word count. And then the second screening will go through the associate editor, who will then make a call about whether or not to do a desk reject, or that the paper's got something that needs reviewers to get into. And I think that's important to remember, that when you get that the invite to review, there's already been some screening gone on, which means that your expertise is required to basically then judge the paper and to make some contribution to the paper.
Just say that with industrial relations, Amanda and I and the 2 deputy editors do the initial screening. We are required to do the decision making around the desk reject, so we don't have those earlier points, but it's the same. I mean, somebody's making that decision.
Someone's made a call that this possible, this has got potential, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. I like what's been said so far, in a sense that civility is important when you do a review. Also using the sandwich approach, which we often do with we're all in HR, most of us are in HR, with respect to performance of performance, right? Recently I read a few articles that's been circulating for a while now that talks about, whether we have a theory crisis in management, right? So that's been circulating quite a while. And of course, we are often looking for theory. We're looking for groundbreaking discoveries. So, but the papers that we get oftentimes don't fall into that category. And then, they do make contributions, but sometimes it's incremental. So what is the difference between an incremental contribution versus a groundbreaking discovery? Tim, I would love to hear your opinion on this.
Okay. Look, I think one of the challenges that I think as editors we all have, right, is, and my area is specific human resource management, industrial relations, and one of the challenges I think we have is when we see, and I was helping a colleague today and discussing this very thing just before our meeting, and I was sitting there saying, look, this paper makes a really good empirical contribution. It tells us something. It was about diversity and how there's some, and that's obviously within your wheelhouse. And there's a lot of, what's the word? There's a lot of talk about diversity and there's a lot of goodwill, but are people actually embracing diversity, and are people with certain characteristics being left out of the diversity? For instance, people with disability, for instance, right? And I said, but the paper doesn't make a theoretical contribution. Like, what is the theoretical innovation? And this is one of the big challenges that I grapple with my own work. I think we all do, is do we necessarily, this is a controversial point, and I've had this from every journal and some of the, like, from, my work from all journals, is incremental versus major theoretical innovation, right? And quite often what you get is it's a minor theoretical innovation, minor. To make those theoretical advances are very rare. They're very unusual in many respects. And we've been able to do that with, maybe in terms of my team, we've been able to do that with a fraction of our papers, particularly some of our papers on workplace violence, which are quite groundbreaking in terms of the role of human resource, the role of HRM in mitigating workplace violence. But I think one of the challenges that we have as editors is the idea of, what happens if a paper doesn't have a theoretical innovation, but talks about some issues that have significant impact on the practitioner world? Because at the end of the day, we want to be relevant. We want to change the lives of humans, of people. Do we necessarily need this amazing advance theoretically that doesn't really impact on the world and doesn't impact on the day-to-day lives of humans, of people that being treated poorly at work or whatever, or being exploited or whatever it may be? So I get the theoretical stuff, I get it, and I think we all try to do that. But sometimes I think editors lose the trees from the forest, or the forest from the trees, one of the two. And I think sometimes, isn't it good enough to actually talk about a phenomena around, for instance, exploitation of diverse groups, such as people with disability, and bring that to the attention of management practitioners? I don't know if that answered the question, but I think I've raised an important point that I think is near and dear to my heart, in the sense of, I want to change practice. I want to influence. I want to create, we want to create better, a better workplace for humans, for people. Do we necessarily need this amazing theoretical innovation that, 6 academics get excited about?
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Tim. I always think, and wonder when are we going to get a Nobel laureate from the management field, right? Because we often talk about being impactful and, doing groundbreaking research. And that has yet to come, but we don't know. I know Lucy has her hand up. Lucy, do you want to add to that point?
I do. I do. Look, the point of theory and any conceptualization is about enhancing understanding. So just novelty for its own sake is highly problematic. I think any conceptual innovation, whether it's drawing on pre-existing theories or putting theories together in a new way to understand not only data, but also practice, speaking to Timothy's point, is very important for not only us, but for practitioners. So I think that's really, really important. However, I know from our own experience that when we've had some really interesting conceptual innovations that come from one discipline that we cover, but not the others. And if you have people that have a particular penchant, let's say in law or IR or HR, and they're good on the topic, perhaps let's say it's on some country in Europe or Asia or whatever, and you give them the review because of their expertise in the area, but they look at the conceptual innovation with horror. So I think we all have a duty to encourage people to be open to conceptual innovation rather than great theoretical advances, because the theoretical advances will come from conceptual innovation, in my humble opinion, or not so humble as it may be.
Thank you for that, Lucy. I couldn't agree more. Just want to check in with Andrew and Pauline to see if you both have something to want to add to that point.
Agree with everything that's been said.
I would
Andrew?
almost say that I would be shocked if we published a groundbreaking discovery, since they would probably be published somewhere higher, in all honesty.
Okay.
But completely agree with what Tim was saying. doesn't have to be a theoretical contribution if it helps understand practice. And so one thing that we're trying to do at AJM is very much, if it's theoretical contribution, that's great. If it's contribution to filling a gap in the literature, that's great. If it is contributing to practice, equally as good. So research is going to solve different purposes. There's a place for it everywhere.
Excellent. Now, I want to turn the table a little bit to ask questions from not a reviewer's perspective, but rather from an author's perspective. But I'm also mindful of time, so I'm just going to squeeze in one question here. So at this moment, I want to encourage all the audience and participants to post questions in the chat. If you have any questions for any of the editors or a specific editor, please post them now so I have an opportunity to pose that question to the editors. So one question I have for all of you, and this comes up fairly often, and it's happened to me actually on several occasions, is what can I do if I perceive a review to be biased or unfair? What are some of the recourse that I can have? Because I feel like I don't have power and, would the editor even pay attention? It might sound like I'm whining or like a sour grape here. So what can I do? I'm going to open this question up to any of you that want to answer.
I'm happy to have a go.
Tim.
I've had, like, for instance, you see, what's it's not that common, but it does happen, is the idea of you have a reviewer that really hates the paper. Like they've really done a job on this. And then the other reviewer is sort of like, yeah, it's good. And there's this and that. And what I try and do is I try and steer as editor or co-editor, I try and steer the author. What I'll try and say is I'll say, look, try and do, points A, B, and C, and don't worry too much about D. If I don't think it's fair, or I don't think it's relevant, or I think it's biased in some way. So I think there's an important role for the editors to sort of steer the paper as well. And I know there are certain journal editors, I should say, that do a wonderful job of this. They really, really do. Unfortunately, they're few and far between. But there are some wonderful editors that really take the time to really steer the responses from the author.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Yeah. So just going on from what Tim has said, as an author, if you're in that situation, then basically you're in some kind of revise and resubmit situation. You're getting the reviews, the associate editor or the editor has actually seen something in your paper and has taken the time to say, yes, we're offering you the revise and resubmit. And then, and may well, hopefully, have given you some guidance about what to address. But if they haven't done that, but you've still got all the comments, then as the author, you've got to try to make sense of those. And so what you've got to try to do is to look where the reviewers have agreed and respond to those responses. And then look at where the reviewers haven't agreed. And in some cases, that I think will mean that you have to respond to something that you actually don't agree with. And the reasons why you don't want to do something. And I think it's fine to do that. It will go back to the editor and then they will make that call.
Thank you.
Also, as an author, I have encountered disciplinary biases, and that goes also to ontology and methodology and all sorts of things. But I do want to say one thing. Journal of Industrial Relations has been working very hard to include Indigenous employment relations scholarship. And it is very clear from our discussions, we now have 2 associate editors that are Indigenous. It is very clear that there are different knowledges and different modes of expression. And we as editors have to be very conscious that we're not excluding knowledges based on a very narrow conceptualization of knowledge itself and how it is framed. So I think that's a really important point. I just wanted to raise it because we're talking about bias. And we see this often also with people from a number of different countries which have different traditions. Language has an impact as well. So it's not just about bias around gender or discipline or disability or whatever. I think there are other very big questions that are beyond the scope of today's session.
Thank you, Lucy. Andrew, just want to check in to see if you want to add to that point. There are several questions that are being posed, so we have invited the audience to actually ask those questions on the Q&A function. So if one of you or several of you have time, can you please respond to those questions on there so everybody else could see it while I try to sort of wrap up the webinar here. Andrew.
If an author perceives a review to be biased or unfair, I think authors need to be pretty careful before actually doing anything about that. In terms of maybe going back to the editor and saying, well, I think this is unfair or this is biased, because you need to very much understand, you need to be very clear, do you understand what the reviewer is saying? Maybe the reviewer hasn't been clear enough, or maybe it's a lack of understanding on the author's part. But yeah, it would probably something that as an author myself, I try to deal with in terms of my response letter to the reviewers to point out what I think is the correct way if I think they've misinterpreted things. But it's probably not going to be the case that I'd go back to the editor and say, oh, this review is biased, and so therefore we should throw it out.
That's a good cautionary. Thank you for that, Andrew. There's several questions, but one I do want to pick out. It's a really practical question that I've encountered quite frequently. So I'm going to pose that question to all of you as well. So sometimes, this is an R&R either at the stage 1 or R&R at stage 2. The original reviewers dropped off, but you still need somebody else to give you or offer you an assessment of the paper, especially with the revisions. So we have invited somebody new to join the review process. I've done this several times. What are some of the expectations we have of the new reviewer who joined it midway through the peer review? Do you expect the reviewer to actually go through the entire paper again, or just address sort of the requests that were being made through the review process? Again, I'm going to open this up to anybody that wishes to answer.
Okay.
If I can just jump in first on this one.
Sure,
I think this is something that should be dealt with very explicitly by the editor in any invitation. I've seen it plenty of times. My personal preference is don't bring on new reviewer because you're essentially then asking someone else to come in, and unless you've given them very specific instructions, it can get very confusing for the authors. If you think about a review as essentially a form of a contract, saying if you do these things satisfactorily, you'll get the paper published. You then bring someone new in and they've got different views, then that sort of implicit contract is being broken then. If an editor is bringing someone on, then I think they should be very clear. And it should be, can you please have a look at the comments from the original reviewer? And is the way in which the authors address these appropriate or not? And essentially that should be the limit of the review.
Great, that's a good point, Andrew. Think about the purpose of bringing in a reviewer midway through, and be clear on the expectations instead of imposing additional expectations. Again, breaching the implied contract, right, that you have mentioned. Anybody else would like to chime in on this?
What I try and do, look, I'm with Andrew. I try and minimize that. And what I usually do is if I can't find, if the a reviewer drops out, what I'll do is I'll get one of the associate editors and then I'll explain the situation to them. And that way, these people have a lot of experience. They know that they're getting the paper, sort of midway. So that's how I deal with it. So that way you're not bringing in you're obviously bringing in a new person, but you're bringing in someone with significant experience where you have a relationship with them, where you can say, look, this is second review. Here's like the weaknesses of the paper are X, Y, and Z. Can we just focus on that? And that way it just minimizes the potential weirdness. Right.
Yeah, that's really good, Tim, in terms of having setting the expectations for the reviewer. So the guidance from the editor is really critical here, right? There are several other questions that I invite all of you to respond to on the Q&A. I feel like we just got started, like the conversation just warmed up, but
Exactly
we're almost at the top of the hour here. I have one last question for all of you, and this is really pertinent. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Is there a role for AI in reviews?
Not in my view.
I can't imagine one.
No.
This is not necessary. This is a very interesting point, Ed. And from my PhD students, like and also from just, you know, similar panel sessions we've had, there's a whole new generation of people that are thinking AI can do all sorts of creative things for them. And just to listen to these PhD students and they're usually PhD students in these types of panels and that I've been involved in. And some of the stuff they come out with is, can I get AI to, you know, to analyze my data? Like, can I get AI to write this for me or do, it is deeply disturbing, some of the things they just throw out at you. So I don't know. I'm a bit old fashioned. I say no.
I'm sensing a unanimous no. There is no role
Yeah,
in
it's like,
AI
no.
for reviews. Let me share a little bit of an. I used to have a role with the academy as a divisional person, and we have noticed that some of the reviews were indeed conducted by AI, Gen AI, in part because two reviews from two separate scholars who conducted the review were almost identical. So unless they really spoke to each other, you know that probably was generated by some Gen AI review, right? The other part that concerned me was I did sit through a paper presentation where the author or the researcher had asked AI to review certain the data set itself to pick out quotes, and this pertained to how the East and the West were crafting job ads that might be gender biased. And when they were asking AI to actually, you know, go through the data analysis, the AI actually was selectively picking out, contributing to the bias in terms of the data analysis. So that again is a significant concern. Well, that is actually on right on top of the clock right now. I am just so grateful to all of you for making time, giving time so generously to come and speak to all of us. So on behalf of JSU Singapore, thank you very much. Andrew, Lucy, Pauline, and Tim, I owe each of you a debt of gratitude. Drinks on me. I plan to attend NZAM later in December. And for those of you who are going to be at the Academy of Management, I will see you there. It's time to bring the webinar to a close. If you would like a recording of today's panel discussion, you can check back in a few days by visiting the JSU Singapore or People's Careers and Cultures Research Cluster website. Thank you again for spending your time with us today. Thank you to the panelists. A big round of applause. Wishing you a good rest of the day from Singapore.
Thanks very much, Ed.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you. I've got to
you.
go, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.